What is up, guys? Welcome to the channel, and in today's video we are going to be talking about the 5 lures that I think every beginner bass fisherman should start out with. I remember when I first started fishing, I was really overwhelmed. I thought I needed a ton of lures to start catching fish, and that is not true at all, guys. The 5 lures that I'm going to recommend in this video are going to have you catching fish year-round in nearly any body of water. On top of that, everything that I'm going to talk about in this video is really easy to use, which is really important when you're a beginner. You don't want to be messing with super complicated stuff. You just want to get out there and catch fish, which is kind of the goal of this whole channel, is to give you tips and tricks so you can get out there as a beginner and start catching fish real quick. And last, before we get started, guys, I want to point out that the 5 lures I'm going to recommend have caught me probably 95% of the bass that I've caught since I've started fishing. And the last lure that I'm going to talk about, my personal favorite, has probably caught me 80 to 85% of all the bass that I've ever caught. So if that's something you're interested in finding out about, stay tuned and we're going to jump right into it. So this first lure that we're going to talk about, if you have any experience with fishing whatsoever, you've probably already heard of it, and that's for good reason, because it is highly effective and it simply catches bass. That lure is, of course, the Wacky Rig. This is an amazing lure that you can throw any time of the year. Unless the water is frozen solid, you will be catching fish with this lure. And it is so simple to use, guys. You just throw it out there, you let it sink to the bottom. Usually 90 to 95% of the time, that bass is gonna hit it as it's floating to the bottom. Wacky rigs with a Senko worm, they just have a really amazing falling action, and they'll just slowly sink down in the water column and they'll kind of flutter. And the bass cannot resist the way that bait looks in the water. Guys, I have always got a Wacky Rig rigged up when I'm out fishing. This is a lure that when I'm out and I haven't gotten a bite, I'm fearing that I'm gonna get skunked, I'm not gonna catch a single fish, I'm throwing a Wacky Rig. Like I said, the bass cannot resist it. If there's bass near you that are feeding, they're gonna hit a Wacky Rig. The only downside that I can think of with this lure is that it takes a really long time to float down, and sometimes if you're fishing in deeper water, it can really slow down how fast you can fish. One way around that I've seen a lot of people do, but I haven't tried personally, is to put a weight in one side of that Senko worm, which can kind of help it float to the bottom a lot quicker. All right, so the next lure that I'm gonna recommend is a spinnerbait, guys. This is another classic lure. You've probably seen it, you've probably heard of it, but it is amazing for beginners because it allows you to mimic one of the primary food sources of a bass, and that is a bait fish. Whether it's a shad or a bluegill, you can go with a certain color spinnerbait to mimic either one of those or any other bait fish that you want. And this is a great bait because it's quicker to fish. You can fish it a lot more fast. So you just throw it out there, you reel it in, and you can cover a lot of water with it. So this is a way that you can find bass. You're not gonna find bass with a Wacky Rig because it's so slow to fish, but with a spinnerbait, you can cover so much water that you can find bass with this lure. Another great thing about the spinnerbait is that it's actually relatively weedless. The covers and the skirt on this thing are actually pretty good at making sure it doesn't get snagged up. So you can throw this thing into some heavy cover and you don't really have to worry too much about it. You're gonna be able to throw this lure, once again, pretty much year round. The only thing to keep in mind is if you're in some of the colder months, you might wanna slow down your retrieve. But as a beginner, the only retrieve you would probably need to worry about with this lure is just throwing it out and just a nice steady retrieve in. You might pause it every now and then because sometimes on those pauses, the skirt of the spinnerbait will flare out and that'll mimic kind of a bait fish or a bluegill kind of getting more aggressive, and that can attract bass. But other than that, this is one of the simplest lures that you can use, and it is super effective for catching bass. The next lure that we're gonna talk about is the Squarebill Crankbait. Take everything that I said about the spinnerbait and apply it to the Squarebill Crankbait, and then add the added benefit that the Squarebill Crankbait is gonna allow you to fish at a certain specific depth that is pre-listed on that bait, which is really helpful when you're in certain fishing situations. So with the spinnerbait, you're really gonna be limited to being able to fish kind of near the bottom. So you just cast it out, it sinks to the bottom and you reel it in. With the Squarebill Crankbait, it is built to stay suspended in the water column at a certain depth. So for example, you're gonna be able to reel that bait in and it'll stay in the 6-foot range of the water column, which is really helpful because sometimes bass like to stay in a certain part of the water column. And if you're using a Squarebill Crankbait and you know where those bass are at, or you're finding them with it, you can kind of target bass in that part of the water column. This is super effective. And once again, this lure is super easy to use. You throw it out there, you reel it in real fast for a second to get it at that suspended depth. And then you just come in with a steady retrieve. Sometimes you can pause it. Some people like to rip it a little bit, but it's super, super easy to use. And once again, it catches a ton of bass all year. Same thing as a spinnerbait. If it's cold, if it's really cold winter months, you might just bring it in a little bit slower. You might give it more pauses while you reel. So reel a little bit, pause, reel a little bit, pause. But this bait is amazing. The next lure that I'm gonna recommend is a topwater lure, and the one I'm gonna go with and say that you start with is a Whopper Plopper. This is a topwater lure that mimics a wounded bait fish that is kind of plopping around or flopping on the top of the water, and bass cannot resist the sound of this lure. And once again, you're probably starting to notice the theme of this video. You just throw this lure out there and you just give it a nice steady retrieve, and it is gonna stay on top of the water, and it's just gonna go pop, 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 pop as it comes back to you, and a bass is gonna see it and it's gonna slam it on the surface of that water. And it is amazing. When you have your first topwater fish, it is the coolest feeling ever to see that bass come up and hit it and grab it, and then you catch it. So this is a really fun lure to fish. It's also super effective. I would recommend you throw this kind of from early spring all the way into late fall. Topwater fishing isn't really effective in the winter, so this is very much a seasonal lure, but it is very effective and super, super easy to use. All right, guys, and now it is time for the final lure of this video. This is the bait that I've caught almost every bass that I've caught on, and this is, of course, the Texas rig. The Texas rig is one of the most versatile lures that you can throw. It allows you to fish on the bottom, but you can also pop the lure up higher into the water column. This is a lure that is weedless, so you don't really have to worry about getting tangled or snagged. And because of this, you're gonna be able to throw this lure into heavy, thick vegetation where those big bass like to sit, and you are gonna be able to get to some spots where other lures would just quickly get tangled up and become ineffective. As with every lure that we've talked about in this video, with the exception of the topwater stuff, you can throw this year round. Something to keep in mind with all these lures though, is that if you're throwing it in the winter, one, like I've already said, fish it slower, but also you might wanna think about downsizing. So if you're throwing a Texas rig and you've got like a really big crawfish looking soft plastic, you might wanna go for like something a little bit smaller when things start to get cold. And similar to the Wacky Rig, most of the bites you're gonna get with the Texas rig are gonna be as that bait is falling to the bottom. You might sometimes catch them on the retrieve, but most of the time, 90% of the time, like I said, it's gonna be as that thing is floating straight to the bottom. All right, so now we are gonna talk about how to rig a Wacky Rig and a Texas rig on the hook. With every other lure that we've talked about, you're just tying it on and throwing it, but these two, you need to know how to put them on the hook. All right, guys, so we're gonna start with a Wacky Rig. This is, I believe, a 1/0 octopus hook by Gamakatsu, but I will double check that and put the hook in the description along with everything else I talked about in this video. But you're gonna start with a Senko, and this is a Yum Dinger. And what you're gonna do is you're basically gonna grab it with your index finger and your thumb, and you're gonna look for the center to where you hold it and it just kind of sits like that, right? So this is kind of what it looks like when it's floating down in the water column, but a little bit more slow. So you grab it like that, and once you find the middle, you're gonna take your hook, and hopefully I can get this on camera, but it's pretty self-explanatory. You take your hook and you just barely hook it through the middle, and you feed it through. And when you're done, it's gonna look something like this, right? So the hook is gonna be going through the middle of that bait, and honestly, I would recommend you go through it. I'll show you. I didn't get it the best there because I was trying to show you on camera, but kind of through the center like that. This is kind of what it looks like from the side, and that's kind of what it's gonna look like. It's a little bit off center here, but that's kind of what you want. You don't want it to be perfect. You want it to be a little bit off center, and it's gonna float down in the water column like that. All right, and now I'm gonna do my best to show y'all how to do a Texas rig. And this is kind of a crawfish looking soft plastic. This is my favorite type of soft plastic to fish a Texas rig on. So what you're gonna wanna do is you're gonna take this soft plastic that you're using, this one's a crawfish, and you're gonna take the hook and you're gonna go through the top of that fish, or I guess the back technically, and you're gonna go through and you're gonna go all the way up till you reach the end of that hook where it starts to curve. Then you're gonna push it through, right? You're gonna push that hook through till it comes out. Then you're gonna go all the way down until you get to the bend in the hook right there. You can see that bend right there. Then you're gonna go down the bend, but you're gonna flip the bait over, right? And then you're gonna pull it all the way down. So what you're left with is kind of the butt end of the lure is on the curve, is on the curve of that hook, and then everything else is still free, right? So then you're gonna take the creature bait and you're gonna line the hook up against it, and you're gonna find where the hook bend aligns with this bait. So right here, it's kind of in the middle of the head. And so then you're gonna grip the lure or the bait right there, right in the middle. And you're gonna take the hook and you're gonna go through the same part where the bend was in the hook. You're gonna push all the way through. And if you've done it right, you're gonna kind of have it looking something like this, right? Where that bait is just straight on there and the hook is just barely tipped out. And then all you do to make it weedless is you take it and you just put the tip of the hook just barely in that soft plastic. That probably wasn't the easiest to see, guys, so there might be a better video out there showing you how to rig this, but hopefully this at least got you started, and that's what it'll look like. And all right, guys, that is it. That's the top 5 lures that I think every beginner bass fisherman should start out with. And then at that point, as you start to get more fish in the boat, then you can start to branch out and maybe pick some more specialized lures. If this video was at all helpful for you, please give me a like, share it, subscribe if you want to see more content like this. I do a lot of tutorials for beginners, but I also do a lot of like fishing videos if that's something you're interested in. Other than that, guys, I hope you have a good rest of your day and good luck out there. Catch some fish. See you next time.